Bienvenue sur Atlantic Dialogue TV en direct de Marrakech où se tient cette conférence internationale organisée par le Policy Center for the New South. J'ai le plaisir d'accueillir aujourd'hui ma collègue qui était hier avec moi, Sabine Sessou, justement de ce Policy Center for the New South, et notre invité justement Christopher Cage, directeur de la stratégie et de l'engagement et des programmes de l'Africacom, l'Africa Command. Welcome.
Thank you.
À vous la parole, Sabine Sessou.
Okay, Major General Craig, you came to the Atlantic Dialogues for the first time, I believe. You talked yesterday on the demographic issues. What's your take on the global feeling that you have from the conference?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Policy Center for the New South for inviting AFRICOM out to this event. I've been greatly impressed by the diversity of people that you've brought together here, diversity of speakers, attendees, everything from economists, policymakers, folks in the security, non-governmental organizations. It's a great meeting of folks to talk about the issues that are affecting not just Africa, but Europe, the entire Atlantic area. So it's been very good. I would say, the panel that I was able to sit on talked about demographics, and at the root cause of that, really, we're talking about those shifts on the African continent, how they affect not just Africa, but also Europe, and likewise what's happening in Europe and how it's affecting the African continent. And I think those touch points and ties really do bind.
Do you think migration is a security issue in Africa?
I think immigration has been discussed greatly. From a security standpoint, what I find is sometimes, regardless of, we can talk about all the different statistics that are out there for immigration, there's much traffic moving inside of Africa on immigration, as well as that moving off of Africa, and likewise from Europe down into Africa. I think the perception of people, though, whether they be European-based or African-based, sometimes there are concerns that are raised. And it's those that end up getting the security apparatus involved with the migration issues. But ultimately, at AFRICOM, what we talk about more importantly is trying to address root causes of instability. And so as a military apparatus, many times that's not the solution. So the military is not the solution for migration. What the solution ends up being, I think in many cases, is focusing on those policies, in this case, is diplomacy and policy, and the development for those populations that are put into those situations.
How do you see, for instance, the French military presence in Africa? Is it a kind of abnormality coming from the post-colonial era, or?
Well, I'll tell you, at AFRICOM, we've seen the French are a very good partner with us, along with our other European allies there, and we work equally with our European allies, but there is a relationship. Certainly, the French have a rich history and have an understanding of the continent that we find very valuable, and we partner with them to try to help, as they do with the African partners themselves, to work with those nations. So I think they've been a great partner in trying to work and address some of those systemic issues, again, working on the development and the diplomacy, the policies, but in some cases getting after the security apparatus that are necessary as well.
For instance, in North Mali, do you work with the French army?
What we do in AFRICOM, especially for the Mali, is we work very closely bilaterally, in many cases with the nations that surround Mali, as well as with the Mali government as well. And then likewise, we are working to support, in this case, the French with Operation Barkhane. And so we do try to help provide those assets that are helpful to them and supporting capabilities for knowing and understanding that they bear the major footprint down there for their operations. But where we can help them out with things like airlift and things like refueling operations, I think are very helpful.
Okay. This morning you heard Amr Moussa, former Secretary General of the Arab League, saying that he feels the Cold War winds blowing on the continent because of the multipolarization of military presence with Japan interest, China interest, Turkey interest, and you name it. What did you think of this statement?
Well, I think the statement that you have the entire globe interested in Africa is not just a good one, it's an accurate one. And I think so that's the part where you can spin that a little bit and say there is an optimism where you've got the entire globe that's interested in Africa. Because in many cases, in some of the demographics discussions we had yesterday, we asked and there was some consensus of, well, is there an opportunity here, or are we mostly concerned about the demographics? I'd like to think that we're tilting towards optimism. But with that optimism also comes opportunity for things like economic gain, some social society, impacts that are going to be felt across the globe. Hence the reason you have many different players from around the world who are interested in trying to establish a footprint. I think everyone is well aware and concerned about, returning to a past that aligns itself with negative connotations of great powers that are operating. And that's where AFRICOM, you will see, very much by, with, and through our partners. So all of our actions on the continent are closely aligned with what those partners need, what those nations are looking for, and how can we have that good relationship. Some nations operating on the continent may not have that same perspective. They may just go in and do things.
Yeah, my next question
Yes.
is, what is China here for? Is China here for in Djibouti, I believe, for Africa, or for the control of the Indian Ocean, competing with India?
Well, I would say with your point about China and Djibouti right now, yes, there's a Chinese base in Djibouti right now, very close to where we have some U.S. operations, and I would say that overall our concern when we look at China is making sure that we're deconflicting our operations with the Chinese as they operate on the continent, as well as mitigating some of the negative or perceived negative connotations. We do have some concerns sometimes with things like good governance, reinforcing that may not be occurring with the Chinese, rule of law, making sure that those things are reinforced and advocated, because we think that's the underpinning for stability. And when necessary, we confront them on these things. And I would say, freedom of navigation, things like air sovereignty, where we see those things being encroached upon to the detriment of the host nation, we want to reinforce those host nations. In this case, for example, pointedly, Djiboutian air sovereignty. We want to make sure that the Djiboutians are controlling that and not an outside interest coming in and trying to control elements of that nation.
Okay. And is there a fear, that would be my last question, is there a fear of Islamist or jihadist forces joining from the western side of Africa and the eastern side of Africa? There's been a lot of talk of this fear of the Al-Shabaab joining Al-Qaeda in Mali. Is it happening, or is this just a fantasy?
Well, I can't speak directly to that intelligence, and there are folks that are much tracking that much more closely. What I would say is that our approach is to try to get to those root causes of what's driving the violent extremists or the susceptibility to that. Going back to what we talked about with AFRICOM, really being a command that is focused on how do we use our military activities to support those development efforts? How do we use that military activities to support the nations so that they can root out that instability? Because the instability is what in many cases is driving that the ability of nefarious actors to come in and sway and try to captivate an audience to move to more violent extremism. And so whether it be in the West or the East, if we take the same approach with our partners, both on the continent as well as our allies, I think that is what will try to stem any tide that moves in that direction.
Good.
Last question also.
Yes.
I would like to have your point of view about this space of dialogue, this Atlantic dialogue here in Marrakesh.
Yes. Again, I started off by talking about how impressed I am with the body of people that you're bringing together here, because it's a great, diverse discussion. I think that this year, as I understand it, there's been a change now to call it the Policy Center for New South, where there's really a focus on how do we put the spotlight on, it's a very old saying, but Africans solving African problems rather than having outside agencies to try to solve these problems. And I think this is just one more case where you have leadership inside of Africa stepping up and saying, how do we address these issues? We may not solve all these issues at a forum like this, but at least it brings together people that can start talking, because again, we're going to be tied globally. We're certainly going to be tied between Europe and African continent. And so to have this thinking and this stimulation of thought here in the New South, if you will, I think is a credit to those folks who are trying to get after the problem.
Je vous remercie infiniment. Thank you very much, Christopher Craig, directeur de la stratégie, engagement et programme de l'Africacom. Merci Sabine Sessou du Policy Center for the New South. On se retrouve dans quelques instants pour d'autres débats, d'autres rencontres à partir de Marrakech. A tout de suite.